Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania, November 3rd, 1879. 20 minutes past 5 in the morning. Daniel Corcoran had been a miner for 22 years. He was 40 years old, Irish-born, and had come to the Pennsylvania coalfields in 1864 after working the copper mines of West Cork for the preceding decade. He knew two kinds of underground, the wet black dark of a coal seam and the harder, brighter dark of a metalliferous mine. And when he transferred from the Lehigh Valley coal operation to the red ash anthracite shaft in Schuylkill County in 1872, he had brought with him a particular competence that his foreman, a company man named Edward Strand, recognized within the first week. Corcoran understood what the ground was going to do before the ground did it. He could read pressure in a timber and stress in a rib pillar and drainage in a face. And he had never, in 22 years underground, triggered a fall that was not a controlled blast. He was the kind of man who made a crew feel safe without saying a word about safety. He was also the kind of man who could tell a tool was hitting the wrong material before the sound traveled up the handle. On the morning of November 3rd, 1879, at 20 minutes past 5, Daniel Corcoran was driving the third cut of the morning shift in the western extension of the Red Ash's number 8 level, 180 feet below the surface of Schuylkill County, when his pick made contact with something that was not anthracite. The contact was different in two ways simultaneously. The resistance was wrong, harder than any anthracite Corcoran had encountered, and the sound was wrong. A flat, dense note without the click that coal gives when struck cleanly. He pulled the pick back and examined the face with his lamp. The face looked like anthracite, black, with the familiar vitreous quality of high-grade anthracite, except for a section approximately 2 feet wide and 18 inches tall, where the surface had a regularity that coal faces do not have. A surface that was too smooth and too uniform to be a natural coal face. He struck it again in a different spot, and the sound was the same. Wrong. He called his butty, a 33-year-old Welsh miner named Owen Rees, who had been working the red ash for 4 years, and who was the only other man Corcoran trusted to assess something unusual without making it into a story. Rees came, struck the face himself at 2 points, and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "It wasn't coal." Corcoran already knew it wasn't coal. What he didn't know was what it was, because he had never, in the copper mines of Cork or the coal fields of Pennsylvania, struck anything that made that sound. They cleared the face by hand, Corcoran's hands and Rees's hands, no picks, working the coal away from the perimeter of the smooth section to establish its dimensions. What they uncovered over the following hour was a curved plate of metal embedded in the coal face, its outer surface showing the characteristic oxidation of a very long burial, its inner surface, accessible at the lower edge where the coal had been cleared back, showing a different quality entirely. The plate was approximately 4 feet wide and 3 feet tall. It curved in a consistent radius, suggesting it was part of a larger curved form. The metal was the color of corroded copper, but denser under Corcoran's knuckle wrap than any copper he had worked with in Cork, where he had handled copper ore and smelted copper and seen copper in every form it took before it became a finished object. He sent Rees up to bring Strand down. Edward Strand was 51 years old and had been managing underground operations in Schuylkill County for 15 years. He came down in the man trip with 2 experienced face workers, brothers named Samuel and Thomas Price, who had been at the red ash for 6 years, and he examined what Corcoran and Rees had uncovered, and he told all 4 men to pull the rest of the coal away from the plate and to work carefully. They spent 3 hours at it. What emerged from the coal face as they worked was not a plate. It was a torso. The curved plate was the front section of a suit of armor, a chest piece, curved to fit the contours of a human torso, interlocking at the sides with flange pieces that had been revealed as the coal fell away, connected at the shoulders by a mechanism of overlapping plates. The chest piece was 4 feet wide and 3 feet tall. The shoulder pieces were each approximately 18 inches across. The proportions of the armor described a figure substantially larger than any human Strand or Corcoran had seen. They worked until they had uncovered the full extent of the embedded material. The armor enclosed a skeleton. The skeleton was complete, fully articulated, undisturbed, in a vertical orientation with the back against what was now revealed as a dressed stone wall behind the coalface. The stone precisely fitted with the same quality of workmanship Corcoran recognized from the cut stone work he had seen in older mines. The figure was standing. A standing skeleton, in armor, in a sealed cavity behind a coalface, at 180 feet below the surface of Schuylkill County. Daniel Corcoran had handled a sledgehammer for 22 years. He picked one up from the tool cache at the face, and he swung it into the chest piece of the armor with a force that he described in the account he gave to the Pottsville Miners Journal correspondent William Shaw on November 8th as a full swing, as much force as he could put into a single blow. The hammer came back at him, not deflected, returned, bouncing off the metal surface with a recoil that traveled up his arms and into his shoulders, and which he said was unlike any impact he had felt in 22 years of working metal and stone. The armor did not dent. The surface of the chest piece showed no mark from a sledgehammer blow. He swung twice more, and the result was the same both times, and he put the hammer down. Edward Strand measured the figure. The standing skeleton inside the armor measured from the heel bones at the base of the stone floor to the top of the skull. A helmet piece, also metal, fitted to the skull without any visible fastening, was 8 feet 9 inches. This is the measurement that appears in William Shaw's Miners Journal account of November 8, 1879, which is the primary published record of the red ash find. Shaw visited the site on November 6th, before access was restricted, and took the measurement himself using a standard measuring rod that the mine kept for timber assessment. The armor's construction defeated every testing method available to the men who examined it in November 1879. Corcoran's sledgehammer left no mark. Shaw, in his published account, described an attempt by Strand to cut a small sample from the edge of one flange piece using a high-grade steel chisel and a 3-pound hammer, the standard method for sampling ore or unusual material in a mine, which produced no chip and left no scratch visible to the naked eye. The metal surface was smoother after the chisel attempt than before, as though the impact had polished the contact point rather than abrading it. This is not a characteristic of any metal or alloy whose properties were documented in the metallurgical literature available in 1879. Corcoran noticed something else. The color of the metal was changing. When he had first uncovered the chest piece, the surface had been the dark oxidized copper color he expected from a metal object long buried in acidic soil. Over the course of the 3 hours of clearing work, as the metal was exposed to the air of the mine, the surface had lightened progressively, not uniformly, but from the areas first exposed moving toward the areas most recently uncovered, as though the surface was reacting to the air exposure by shedding its oxidation layer. By the time Shaw arrived on November 6th, Corcoran said, the chest piece had a surface that he could not describe accurately because it had no close parallel in his experience. A gray-gold color, uniform across the surface, neither bright nor dull, with a quality he tried to describe to Shaw as looking lit from inside, which was not a description he was satisfied with, but was the best he could produce. Shaw confirmed this description in his article, adding that the surface appeared to absorb rather than reflect the lamplight, which he noted as the opposite of polished metal behavior. The federal marshals arrived at the Red Ash mine on November 7th, the day after Shaw's visit and the day before his article appeared. There were 3 of them, traveling with 2 civilians whose professional affiliation was not established in the mine's visitor log, which recorded names but not employers. The 3 marshals and 2 civilians went down to the number 8 level and were at the site for 4 hours. When they came up, one of the civilians was carrying a leather case. The case had not been in his possession when he went down. Edward Strand was told that the find was being placed under federal jurisdiction pending a heritage assessment, and that the cavity and its contents were not to be touched, disturbed, or described publicly. He confirmed in a letter he wrote to the Red Ash Company's Philadelphia owner, a letter that survives in the Schuylkill County Historical Society's business records collection under the designation Red Ash Shaft Correspondence, that the instruction was given verbally by the senior federal marshal and was not accompanied by any written documentation. Strand asked for written documentation and was told it would be provided. It was not provided. The letter to the Philadelphia owner, dated November 9th, described Strand as uncertain of the legal basis for the instruction, but unwilling to contest federal authority in a matter of this kind. The skeleton and the armor were removed from the number 8 level over 3 days beginning November 10th. Strand was not present for the removal. No member of the original discovery crew was present. The removal operation used a different shaft, the Red Ash's ventilation shaft, which had a larger aperture than the man-trip shaft, and brought materials to the surface in crates that the mine's surface workers saw loaded onto a covered wagon. The wagon's destination was not established by any record available to the mine. The Red Ash Anthracite Company's production records show a 2-week suspension of number 8 level operations beginning November 7th. The stated reason in the company's quarterly report to the Pennsylvania Bureau of Mines was geological assessment of unusual subsurface formation. The formation, the dressed stone wall behind the coalface, which was 7 feet wide and ran at least 12 feet in each direction from the original find point, was assessed, per the quarterly report, as a natural geological feature. The report was signed by Edward Strand. In his personal letter to the Philadelphia owner, written the same week, Strand described the stone wall as plainly worked, with joins of unusual precision, of a character I am not able to attribute to any natural process. The discrepancy between the two documents is in the record at the Schuylkill County Historical Society. The dressed stone wall was sealed with concrete in November 1879. The number 8 level was subsequently worked around it, not through it. The geological survey maps of the Red Ash shaft, filed with the Pennsylvania Bureau of Mines for the period 1880 through 1895, when the mine was exhausted and closed, show the number 8 western extension terminating at an unspecified obstruction. No notation on the survey maps identifies the obstruction as a sealed concrete pour or a dressed stone wall. The Red Ash shaft property, approximately 160 acres in central Schuylkill County, was acquired in 1897 by the Schuylkill Valley Land Corporation, incorporated in Delaware in February 1897. 4 months before the acquisition. The purchase price was recorded at a nominal value well below comparable mine properties sold in Schuylkill County in the same period. The Schuylkill Valley Land Corporation has had no commercial activity since its incorporation. The property taxes have been paid annually without interruption. A Freedom of Information request filed in January 2021 by the researcher Thomas Alvarez requesting all Department of Interior records relating to the Red Ash mine for the period 1879 through 1900 was denied under Exemption 7, which covers law enforcement records. Exemption 7 does not apply to heritage assessment records from 1879. Daniel Corcoran is the center of this case for the 22 years of underground experience he brought to the moment his pick found something that was not anthracite, and for the precision of his account to William Shaw, and for one additional fact. He was the last person to describe the armor's surface in a specific and technically detailed way. His description of the color change, the progressive shedding of oxidation from the first exposed areas toward the last, producing a gray-gold surface that appeared to absorb rather than reflect light, is a description of a self-cleaning metal surface. A surface that sheds its own oxidation layer upon air exposure, producing a clean base metal finish, is a surface whose alloy composition includes a constituent that reacts with the oxidation layer at a rate faster than the oxidation itself forms. This is a property of certain modern engineered alloys, specifically of alloys designed for aerospace applications, where surface stability under variable atmospheric conditions is a functional requirement that did not exist in the metallurgical literature of 1879, and that was not achieved in practice until the 20th century. A self-cleaning metal surface that also deflects a full-swing sledgehammer blow without marking is not described in any known metallurgical tradition prior to the modern period. It is described by a 40-year-old Irish miner in Schuylkill County in November 1879 in an account given to a local newspaper correspondent, because he was the first person to examine it in the air, and he was precise enough about what he saw to make the description reproducible. The leather case that the unnamed civilian carried out of the number 8 level on November 7th contained something. The case is not in any archive. The description of what it contained has been in the Miners' Journal archive since November 8th, 1879. Daniel Corcoran continued to work at the Red Ash shaft through its closure in 1895. He died in Pottsville in 1901. His obituary in the Miners' Journal, a single paragraph, describes him as a steady and experienced miner who was well regarded by his crews. It does not mention November 1879. His family, in a brief note to the Historical Society in 1934, declining to donate his personal papers, said there were no personal papers of any significance. What he said to William Shaw, he said once, on the record, in 1879, and it is in the archive, and it describes in precise physical terms an object that should not exist at 180 feet below Schuylkill County in 1879. The dressed stone wall is still behind the concrete the federal operation poured in November of that year. The cavity is sealed. The camera on the gate of the Schuylkill Valley Land Corporation property faces the county road. The armor is not there anymore. What is still there is the wall that enclosed it, and the shape of the coal face where Corcoran's hands cleared 22 years of underground knowledge against a surface that left no mark when he hit it with everything he had. The dressed stone wall behind the red ash coal face is the physical element of this case that no official account has attempted to explain, because the official account, the company's quarterly report description of a natural geological feature, is internally contradictory on its face. A dressed stone wall is not a natural geological feature. The distinction between natural and worked stone is not a matter of interpretation. It is a matter of surface morphology. Natural stone fractures along crystal boundaries and bedding planes, producing irregular surfaces. Worked stone is cut with tools, producing flat planes with parallel tool marks at consistent depths. Edward Strand described the wall as plainly worked with joins of unusual precision, of a character I am not able to attribute to any natural process. He was a mine superintendent who had spent 15 years examining both natural and worked stone underground. He knew the difference. His formal filing with the Pennsylvania Bureau of Mines described the same wall as a natural geological feature. The two documents are in the archive in the same county. The wall's dimensions, as Strand described them in his personal letter, 7 feet wide, running at least 12 feet in each direction from the original breach point, establish a constructed feature of significant scale. A wall section of at least 24 feet in horizontal extent, dressed to the precision that Strand described as featuring joins of unusual precision, at 180 feet below the surface of Schuylkill County, represents a construction effort of a scale and technical sophistication that has no precedent in any documented pre-Columbian North American tradition. The closest parallel in scale and technique is the dry stone masonry of the Inca and pre-Inca Andean traditions, the walls at Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo in Peru, which show the same characteristic of block-to-block joins of extraordinary precision without mortar, joints so tight that a blade cannot be inserted between blocks. The Andean comparison is not a cultural argument. It is a technical comparison. The same construction standard, fitted stone without mortar, joins of a precision that no conventional masonry technique can explain, appears in a documented form in the Andes and in an undocumented form behind a coalface in Schuylkill County. The question is not how Andean builders reached Pennsylvania. The question is, what tradition of fitted stone construction existed in North America at a period before European contact, and how the existence of that tradition was sealed behind concrete in November 1879. The armor is the element of the case that the metallurgical record cannot accommodate within any known framework. Daniel Corcoran's three descriptions, the rebound of the sledgehammer with no mark left on the surface, the failure of Strand's chisel to produce a chip or visible scratch, and the color change from oxidized dark to gray gold upon air exposure, form a metallurgical profile that does not correspond to any alloy documented in the scientific literature of the 19th century or earlier. The rebound of a full-swing sledgehammer without surface marking indicates a hardness exceeding the hardest tool steels available in 1879, which have a Mohs hardness in the range of 7 to 8. A material that a sledgehammer cannot mark must approach or exceed the hardness of industrial diamond, which is the hardest substance in the naturally occurring material record. The failure of a high-grade steel chisel to produce a chip-free surface under chisel impact, indicates a material with a fracture toughness exceeding the chisel steel, a property associated in modern material science with certain ceramic matrix composites and advanced metallurgical alloys that did not exist in 1879. The color change from oxidized dark to gray gold upon air exposure is, as noted in the primary script, characteristic of a self-cleaning alloy, an alloy whose surface chemistry includes a constituent that reduces its own oxide layer upon air contact, producing a continuously clean metal surface without mechanical intervention. No naturally occurring metal has all three of these properties simultaneously. No alloy documented in the pre-1879 metallurgical literature has all three properties simultaneously. The armor that Daniel Corcoran struck 3 times with a full-swing sledgehammer on the morning of November 3, 1879, was made from a material that did not exist in the technological record of 1879 and does not exist in the archaeological record of any period and culture associated with North America. It exists in one documented record, Daniel Corcoran's account to William Shaw, published in the Miners' Journal on November 8, 1879, and the physical armor which left the mine in a federal marshal's custody on November 7, 1879, and has not appeared in any accessible record since. The figure inside the armor was 8 feet 9 inches tall. William Shaw measured it with a timber assessment rod. He was not estimating. He put the rod against the skeleton from heel to crown and read the measurement. 8 feet 9 inches. A standing human skeleton of 8 feet 9 inches is outside the documented range of human skeletal variation at any period. The tallest documented human being in the medical record of the modern era, Robert Wadlow of Illinois, who died in 1940, reached 8 feet 11 inches at his maximum recorded height. The 8 feet 9 inches documented by William Shaw in a Pennsylvania mine in 1879 is within 2 inches of the maximum recorded in the modern medical record. It is not impossible. It is at the extreme limit of what the medical record accepts as possible in the human skeletal range. The armor around the skeleton was built for the skeleton. The chest piece dimensions, 4 feet wide, 3 feet tall, curved to a torso radius consistent with a figure of 8 feet 9 inches, confirm the skeleton's proportions independently. Two measures, independently taken from two different elements of the physical evidence, producing consistent results. Shaw measured the skeleton. Shaw also measured the chest piece. He was careful because he was a journalist who understood that this story required precise documentation or it would not be believed. And he was a journalist in 1879 who had only one opportunity to take the measurements, and he used it correctly. His numbers are in the archive. The armor and the skeleton are not. Daniel Corcoran was 40 years old when his pick made the wrong sound on the morning of November 3rd, 1879. He had heard the sounds of underground work for 22 years, and he knew when a tool was hitting the wrong material.
He stopped, and he called Owen Rees, and they cleared the face by hand, and what they uncovered changed the working day and the subsequent history of the Red Ash No. 8 level and the career trajectory of a mine superintendent who filed two contradictory descriptions of the same physical feature. Corcoran continued to work at the Red Ash through its closure in 1895, and he died in Pottsville in 1901, and his family had no papers of significance to donate. What he said to William Shaw, he said once. The Miners' Journal Archive has kept it for 145 years. The dressed stone wall is behind the concrete pour of November 1879.
The armor and the skeleton are in the Smithsonian's custody, in a location whose accession records do not acknowledge them. The camera on the gate of the Schuylkill Valley Land Corporation property is pointed at the county road. Behind the gate, 180 feet down, the concrete is intact. What it seals has been sealed since before Daniel Corcoran was born. The Red Ash mine case sits at the intersection of two independently documented American anomalous finds whose geographic proximity is not coincidental. The Red Ash shaft in Schuylkill County is approximately 40 miles southwest of the Sayre, Pennsylvania site, and approximately 60 miles east of the Gettysburg site. Three of the most significant anomalous finds in the Pennsylvania record, Gettysburg in 1866, Red Ash in 1879, Sayre in 1880, occurred within 14 years and within a geographic triangle whose widest dimension is approximately 100 miles. Pennsylvania's geological record for the relevant depth range, 150 to 400 feet below surface, is one of the most intensively excavated in the United States because Pennsylvania's coal and iron deposits motivated deep shaft work throughout the 19th century at a scale unmatched in any other state. The concentration of anomalous finds in Pennsylvania's deep shaft record may not reflect a geographic concentration of anomalous sites. It may reflect the fact that Pennsylvania's mining intensity in the period 1860 through 1900 produced more subsurface exposure than any comparable region, increasing the probability of encounter with whatever the deep geology of the eastern Pennsylvania range contains. The dressed stone wall at 180 feet in Schuylkill County is one element in a subsurface pattern that the Red Ash case, the Gettysburg case, and several less documented Pennsylvania finds from the same period suggest may represent a substantial subterranean architectural complex. The dimensions of the wall Edward Strand described, 7 feet wide, running 12 feet or more in each direction from the breach point, are the dimensions of a structural feature, not an isolated construction. Structural features at this scale are not built in isolation. They are built as components of larger constructions. A dressed stone wall of 24 feet horizontal extent at 180 feet below the Pennsylvania surface is consistent with the perimeter wall of a larger underground structure whose full dimensions the Red Ash breach exposed only partially. What the blast that created the breach opened was one section of one wall. The structure behind it extended beyond the field of view available to Corcoran, Rees, Watts, and Shaw during the brief period of access before the federal marshals arrived. William Shaw was a professional journalist who had been covering the Schuylkill County coal fields for the Miners Journal since 1874. He was not an amateur observer or a local eyewitness with no framework for assessment. He was a man who had spent 5 years visiting mine sites and documenting conditions and interviewing miners, and he understood the difference between a story that needed corroboration and a story that needed to be published with what corroboration was available. He visited the Red Ash No. 8 level on November 6, 1879, 2 days before his article appeared, and he was thorough. He measured the skeleton with the timber rod. He noted the armor's color and surface quality from Corcoran's description and from his own observation. He recorded the dimensions of the chest piece and shoulder pieces. He noted the dressed stone wall and its construction quality, and he wrote it all down in the article that appeared on November 8th. He had one visit and one opportunity, and he used it correctly. The federal marshals arrived the following day, November 7th, before the article appeared. Shaw's visit was the last civilian access to the Red Ash No. 8 chamber. Everything that appeared in his November 8th article was documented from the November 6th visit. The article has been in the Miners Journal archive since 1879. It is the last eyewitness account produced by someone who was not under any institutional constraint when they wrote it. Daniel Corcoran was not under constraint when he spoke to Shaw. He spoke 3 days after the discovery, before the federal visit, before any instruction from Strand about discretion. He said what he had seen. Shaw wrote what Corcoran said and what Shaw had seen himself. The article is in the archive. The armor it describes is in the Smithsonian's system without an accession number. The dressed stone wall it describes is behind the concrete pour of November 1879 in the No. 8 western extension of the Red Ash shaft, under the ground of the Schuylkill Valley Land Corporation property, behind the gate, below the camera. The camera is on a steel arm. The cable running to it from the gate post is new.